the first part of this is just notation. In terms of x and y intercepts, I just want to go over that really quick for objective 3, finding x and y intercepts when it's in function notation. All right, the process is really not different, but the understanding in terms of where the y is what I really want to go over. So all you're going to do is treat f of x or g of x or h of x or whatever the name of the function is of x, treat that just like y. You do everything else the same as what we did for previously. So when we're looking for the x-intercept, how do you do that?
Sub in 0 for y.
0 for y, but in this case, instead of subbing it in for y, we're going to sub it in for f of x or g of x or h of x. All right. How about for the y-intercept? What am I plugging in?
0 for x.
0 for x. Okay, so it's the same idea, same concept, but instead of there being a y, because there's not going to be a y, there's going to be an f of x or a g of x or an h of x, you're going to plug that in. Okay, that's all that this says. So to find the y-intercept, you're going to plug 0 in for x, and instead of getting 0 comma y, you're going to get 0 comma f of x. So that's really all the same. Just like I said, working on notation, familiarity with that, so you know that it's in terms of what you do, it's really no different. Okay. And of course, for the x-intercept, instead of plugging 0 in for y, you're going to plug it in for f of x. Now, if you want, in terms of your level of understanding, if you want to change the f of x as you work through the problem to y, that's fine. You just have to change it back before you finish. Okay. And then it's identical if you change it to y. But you know, it's probably a good idea to get used to just using it as f of x or g of x or h of x or whatever. Okay, so that's objective 3. I'm not really going to go over that. We've covered that before in terms of how to find x and y intercepts. But any questions on that? Should be pretty straightforward. So we found domain and range the other day, but it was always a set of points. Now we're going to look at graphs, and we're going to find domain and range from graphs. And in some cases, you'll have a scatter plot, basically a graph full of points. And so we're going to find the domain and range for that, which you already actually did for your homework for today, which was not a big deal. But we are going to have some other kinds of graphs. And so how to find the domain and range from those is a little trickier. Okay? And so if you want to screenshot this on page 188, go for it. If you want to take a picture of this, you're welcome to do that too. And then we're just going to go through each one, and I'm going to talk about some strategies as to, in particular, how to find the domain and range from these two. This one, like I said, we already did. In fact, if you want to find the domain and range for this first one, please go ahead and do that. And then we'll talk about B and C together, and I think that'll help. Like I said, I'll give you some strategies I think will help make that easier. Grace, what is the domain for the first graph?
I don't know.
Really? Mm-hmm. Do you know what the domain is? Generally speaking?
Refresh my memory.
I'll let someone else refresh your memory.
Okay.
Kalani, would you like to refresh Grace's memory on what the domain is?
Isn't it from how far it goes to the right to the left? Or doing it the...
Just for the first graph. We're just speaking in generalities what the domain is. Bella, what is the domain?
It's all the X.
It's all the x's. That's it. It's all the x's. Would you like to state the x coordinates now, Grace, for those points?
Absolutely love
Thank you. What would that be?
it. So, -3.
Okay.
-1.
Yep.
0.
Yep.
2.
Yep.
And 4.
Very good. Well done.
Yeah.
Well done. All right. Kalani, redemption. Give me the range for that first one.
For -4, 1, 2, 4.
Okay. There's your domain and range. Okay. Just listing the x's, those are the domain. Listing the range, those are the y's. Okay. Like I said, we did that the other day. Those ones are fairly simple. Okay. When we're just naming the x and y, and we have points, and they're very specific values. Okay. It's a little trickier when we get to the next two, and so I'm going to put something up here that I think will help. You're going to look for vertical boundaries, and if you think about vertical lines, they're going to hit the x-axis for the domain. And you're going to look for horizontal boundaries, because those horizontal lines will hit the y-axis for the range. So you have to look for that. Like, obviously, when you see graphs with arrowheads on them, we know that they keep going on and on forever and ever. And so what we have to see is there a boundary to the left or to the right or above or below? And if you can find those boundaries, that's going to help give you a numerical value for either where to start or where to end. Okay. So on this first graph, we see there's an arrowhead here, which means it's going to go up forever in this direction, which means it's going to go to the right forever, it's going to go up forever. Okay? And so right, it'll go to positive infinity to the right and positive infinity vertically high. Right? But I do have a boundary. Right? Because it hits a wall right here if I'm looking at it from left to right. So that's when I talk about vertically. So for the domain, I have this boundary right here. Right? The graph never goes to the left of that boundary. Okay? It goes to the right.
On Facebook?
Okay? So what is the smallest possible x value for this graph?
-3.
Is -3 part of this graph?
No.
Why not?
Oh.
It's got an open circle. So it butts right up against -3, but it never actually equals -3. So when I'm creating, so instead of saying, for example, this is x greater than -3. Okay? But we're going to put these in interval notation. So we're talking about parentheses or brackets. Okay? Is this one going to have a parenthesis at -3 or a bracket at -3? And as we stated, it's going to go to positive infinity because it's going to just climb to the right and get greater and greater. So the domain for this is simply going to be from -3 to infinity, both with parentheses. We'll always put parentheses when it comes to either positive or negative infinity. Okay. Now, we can look at, from the same perspective, a horizontal boundary. Is there a minimum value or a maximum value? Minimum. So like there's a bottom, there's a floor, but there's no ceiling. Okay? So my floor is going to happen right there. So what's the smallest y value that we can have?
-2.
-2, but is it included or no?
No.
No, it's still not included. It's still an open circle, which means I'm going to have a parenthesis. And what's the highest value that we could have? Positive infinity. Okay? So my range ends up being from -2 to positive infinity. Okay? Alright, why don't you try the last one and see what you come up with for your domain and range, and we'll talk about and see if you got it right. So go ahead and do that now, please. First off, here's what you have to assume, okay? Because you can't see all the graph. Whenever you see arrowheads, you can't see all the graph, alright? And what you have to remember about parabolas is no matter how far down it goes, it will always keep widening out. Okay, so it doesn't square up. It keeps widening out a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. So for the x value, okay, it's going to keep opening. The further you move left, there's going to be a point and it's going to keep opening. And further you move right, it's going to keep opening. There's always going to be some x value that you can choose, and it will be part of that particular equation. Which makes the domain what?
All real numbers.
All real numbers, which in interval notation is
Negative infinity.
-infinity to positive infinity. Okay? So that's how we write all real numbers using interval notation. Okay? Is there a horizontal boundary? Does it have a ceiling or a floor? It has a ceiling. Okay? And that ceiling is up here. And we have to make an assumption. Does that top point hit 4 or not? And we're going to make an assumption that it does. Alright, there's not an open circle. Okay? So the highest value now is 4. What's the smallest value? negative infinity, okay, negative infinity. So the negative infinity comes first, because that's the smallest number, and we say that 4 is included, so that's where it's going to have a bracket instead. Okay, how many had that for domain and range? How many had that correct? How many were really close and you were off by a little bit, okay? Anybody have questions on it? So like I said, that's a little more abstract, that's a little trickier. Hopefully that boundary idea is helpful, okay? And it will make this a little bit easier. The last thing that we have to do in this section is use a graph to do some interpreting, okay? You're going to have, what I'm going to put on the next screen, you're going to have a graph and it's going to have like 8 or 9 questions. And from the graph, you're going to be able to pull that information out. And we have to talk about what that is, okay? So this is on page 191 in your book. If you would prefer to screenshot, if you want to take a picture of the screen, please feel free to do that. Let's talk about how to do this first one. When they're saying what is the value of f of negative 2, what information does this give you?
X.
And what about it?
X
X equals negative 2. Okay? So we're trying to find the value of f when x equals negative 2. Okay? So I've got to come over here where x is negative 2 and find the corresponding f of x or y value. Okay? So what is that y value that goes with negative 2? 1. So that's all you have to do. Just 1. Okay? Now, B, you'll do the same thing. So go ahead and do B. And then C and D, flip it. Now they give you the f of x value. And now you have to find the x value that corresponds with it. So go through those questions and try to get them answered, and then we'll come back together and go through it. Raise your hand if you have an answer for B. Raise your hand if you have an answer for B. Raise your hand if you have a numerical answer for B. What do you got? Lindsay, what do you got?
I had -4.
Negative 4. How many agree with Lindsay that it's negative 4? Raise your hand. Okay. About half of you. How many have something different? Gabby, what do you got? Undefined. So let's talk about it. Anybody else have undefined or something like that? Okay. So if I look at the value when f of 4, so that means x equals 4. I come over here to where x equals 4, and I land on this open circle. Is that point right there part of the graph? It's not. Open circle, it's not part of the graph. Okay? So I understand why you said negative 4, but in the reality is, there is no value for when x equals 4. So you could say undefined, you could say not defined. No solutions on the thing, there's not an equation here. So one of those two things, okay? No point there, something, okay? So that one actually is not defined. All right, for C, we're looking for when f of x equals 3, which is right here. So what's the x value that corresponds with that? Negative 4. How many had that one? Good. All right, for part D, I saw some good answers and I saw some not so good answers, but I understand why you put them, okay? So for f of x equals 1, we're actually talking about this segment right there. All right? So all the points on that segment are included, not just the integers. So I saw a bunch of you that wrote negative 1, negative 2, and negative 3. Well, there's a bunch of points in between negative 1 and negative 2. Fractions, decimals, right? Same with there. So I have to write an interval that contains all of those points. And negative 1 is included, and negative 3 is included. So my smallest value is negative 3, my biggest value is negative 1. They're included, so those go in brackets. Okay, how many had that one right? Okay, good. So be careful on those. X-intercept and y-intercept happens to be the same point. They both cross the x and y axis at the origin, so both 0. We do have boundaries here because of this particular point. So the domain is going to be less than 4. The range is going to be greater than negative 4. Okay, and so when it's less than 4, it goes to negative infinity. Biggest value is at 4 or right about 4. That's why we have the parenthesis because of this open circle. And then the range, the smallest value is going to be -4, and it's going to go up. Okay. How many had the domain and range right? Good. Okay. Questions about this? That pretty much covers everything that you're going to be doing in day 2. Okay. Tomorrow you've got a quiz over 2-1 and 2-3. So be sure to study all that. As you look at your assignment for today, you'll see that I want it submitted and the answers checked before you come to class tomorrow. So that way you have the entire period for the quiz. Okay?